I'm the daughter of a sailor, so like I fit that stereotype.
Hey,
so I just wanted to give that warning.
You're talking to two sailors right here. I'm active duty Navy. She's a former Hilo pilot. So trust me, there's plenty of salt and sailor mouth in this household. So. Welcome to Talk with History. I'm your host, Scott, here with my wife and historian, Jen.
Hello.
On this podcast, we give you insights to our history-inspired world travels, YouTube channel journey, and examine history. And tonight, we are chatting with the host of Tipsy Fish History YouTube channel. Welcome, Aster.
Howdy.
So before we start chatting with Aster and learning about her YouTube channel and everything, and before we start emptying our glasses for anybody listening at home, I want to ask our listeners to help us out by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or feel free to reach out to us at reach out to us at thehistorybuzz.com. That's our other podcast. Don't forget to check out that other podcast, Talk with History, where Jen and I dive deeper into our Walk with History videos, and we give people a behind-the-scenes look at our YouTube journey. Now, our guest tonight is Aster, the host of Tipsy Fish History, which, as of recording, has just over 13,000 subscribers and over 150 videos for you history fans out there.
Oh, God, it's been 150.
It's been over 150.
Oh, so God.
On her About tab in YouTube, Aster says that she has a passion for history. The more obscure the topic, the more learning is to be had. So welcome tonight, Aster. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm not dead, so that's a plus.
Absolutely.
Every day above ground is a good day.
Yeah, every day you're standing above dirt is a good day. So, Aster, can you...
Unless you're in Spelunca. But go ahead,
yes,
sorry.
Yes. So, Aster, I like to kind of kick things off by learning about our guest. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe how you grew up to grow to enjoy history so much, and maybe how that translated into the YouTube channel?
Oh, God. Well, where to start on that front? I probably the earliest stages of when I got into history was I'm a former freight hopper, so hobo for people that don't know what that means.
Oh wow!
And I spent my early teen years from 12 to 16 essentially just riding the rails during the height of the recession.
Oh my gosh!
So that was that. You tend to learn a lot of stuff from that point in time. You get very interested in ultimately very mundane things, and to pass a lot of the time you'd find books. I'd read books.
Gotcha.
I learned how to read during that period of time. And history kind of became something that I just went to, more or less. I liked learning.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I can't say that I've ever met anyone with that kind of background. So when you say kind of interested in mundane things, like, can you give me an example of that?
Oh, God. Yeah, I'm trying to think exactly. There was one of the rate lines that you could follow through. If I go into too much detail,
have at it. I tell people all the time, this doesn't have to be a history podcast. This is this is a people podcast.
This is a people podcast, and that's a very unique background. What did you call yourself again? A rail writer?
A freight hopper.
A freight hopper.
Okay, so you were talking about one of the rails that kind of you could follow pretty far.
You would do either of you know your geography at all?
Oh yeah.
She's much better than I, although I never admit it.
So, do you know where Tenton County is in Wyoming? Jackson, kind of the ski resorts.
Oh my gosh, I grew up in Cheyenne, Wyoming. So yes.
Oh well, there you go. Yes, obviously then. I'll lower this down a tad.
Sure.
But ultimately, there used to be a rail line that would connect Tenton County down in through into Colorado, where you could connect into like Fort Collins or Aurora.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
But it followed Highway 435, I think it was called.
Okay.
That went through Moffat County. And Moffat County in Colorado is about 25,000 square miles and has a population of maybe 4,000.
Oh, wow.
And we ended up getting, because I rose the group, we ended up getting stuck for about 5 months in that county due to a big blizzard that came through.
Wow.
And from that point in time, we were in a little cabin, shed, whatever you want to call it. And because, of course, there was a few books talking about, hunters in the region or, kind of the history of that sort of area.
Yeah.
And that's my first real memory of what sparked I want to learn more about it.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing. But
Cool.
That's so cool. So how did that eventually translate into the YouTube channel?
it eventually translated because after I was done freight hopping, I reconnected with members of my family again, and primarily my half sister, and at that time her partner, and they were interested in getting into kind of a YouTube thing, and the irony was that the name Tipsy Fish came about because it was like, oh yeah, we're a bunch of like sardines, but because those two didn't drink,
yeah,
they diluted me down to tipsy. Now it's the other way around to where I don't drink anymore, but now they drink.
Oh, that's too funny.
But and so we kind of started off doing very basic kind of skits and that sort of thing because I always had a passion for filmmaking.
Yeah.
And especially silent films. I have a collection of silent films on Laserdisc.
Oh, cool.
Kind of started from there, and then I started to want to teach a little bit more about history.
Yeah.
It was originally just alternate history at the start, and then it delved into more generalistic history, and I don't even do alt history anymore because of the audience that tends to attract.
Oh, interesting.
That's true.
Sure.
But your history is still, I looked at your channel. You still do things that are like the question that someone might ask, well, what was Turkey doing during this time? Or what was happening over here? You do that kind of history. Like not the more like
the main event.
The main event. You're doing what, history's still happening around us, but what are these other outliners doing at this time? That's very interesting, I think.
Yeah, and it's more of it's kind of how I was never fascinated with large events. I used to study primarily American Civil War history, and I couldn't care less about learning about Gettysburg or Bull Run or anything like that. I was more interested in like the Mississippi campaign or the Confederates' attempt to take California. And things of that sort. And it just kind of went on from that point, I guess.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, I mean, it sounds to me like you kind of like some of the lesser known historical events that are happening at the same time, right? And also kind of that actually provides, in an interesting way, it provides context to those other events that we all know, like a Gettysburg or whatever, right? You're actually painting the picture larger for people who already know maybe the main event. And they're like, well, what else was going on? And you're answering some of those questions. Yeah.
Or in a lot of cases, it's people thinking, oh, I didn't know that there was anything else.
Yeah. It's not even on their radar. I always say history is happening. People are living and people are experiencing the events wherever they're at. So you just have to go and, research what were they doing there. So that's awesome.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Well, Aster, one of the, once we kind of get to know our guest a little bit, one of the things I like to do is what I like to call kind of a history word association game. So this is just a fun way for me to broach a topic, right? And for me to kind of lead into it because it lets us kind of hear what you're thinking and then allows our listeners to kind of play along with kind of the word association game. So I've got a couple words that'll lead into a well-known historical figure or topic. And if I'll say the word, you give me your thought, phrase, paragraph, whatever, what have you, that comes to mind. And then we'll just kind of go from there. So does that sound okay?
Yeah, that sounds good. I should have asked. I should have asked beforehand.
Oh, sure.
Is this family-friendly podcast? Keep the swearing to a minimal sort of deal.
It's the history buds. You can. I would be like, just be your authentic self.
Yeah.
That's what I would. Be your most authentic self.
Yeah. If we go too far off the rails, I'll just put a disclaimer at the beginning of the podcast and be like, hey, don't listen to this with kids in the car, right? I will say that very clearly. I'll give a 10-second pause, and then I will let the podcast start.
I'm the daughter of a sailor, so like I fit that stereotype.
Hey, you were
so
talking-
I just
We're
wanted to give
both
that warning.
sailors.
You're talking to two sailors right here.
Talking to two
I'm
sailors.
active duty Navy.
Uh-oh.
She's a former helo pilot. So
Yeah.
trust me, there's plenty of salt and sailor mouth in this household. So
Oh, thank God! Oh, thank God! I don't have to have my extra packets. I don't have to bring them.
yeah.
Don't mind the packets of salt I have in that drawer. But,
All right, so I'm going to kick it off here with our word association game. So, Aster, if I was to say 1882, what's the first thing that would come to mind?
U.S. presidential election.
Okay, all right, U.S. presidential election. If I was to say Herbert Hoover, what would you think?
Same vein.
Same thing, okay.
Well, that would be when he was a senate. That's when he would probably run as a senator. Oh boy. Go ahead.
Okay, all right. Now, if I was to say New York, what would you think?
Much the same. A senator or an election.
Okay. All right. Now, this should start making it a little bit more obvious. If I was to say Hyde Park, what would you think?
I'm clueless on that one.
Okay. All right. That's okay. And now the last, and this is the actual topic, I would say FDR.
Yeah.
That's how all that stuff would tie together. Yeah. So if FDR is kind of the person we're going to chit chat about here a little bit. So he was actually born in 1882. Herbert Hoover was what did he run? He run against Herbert Hoover.
Yes.
So FDR actually, to your point, FDR defeated him in the 1932 election when he ran for president.
Because Hoover was the president during the Depression.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then New York, FDR is from New York. Hyde Park is just outside of New York, where FDR kind of.
That was kind of his vacation place before, like a Camp David
Yeah.
and stuff. He would go to Hyde Park.
Yeah.
And actually, he's buried there.
Yeah. So that's kind of how all those words kind of lead into FDR, the president, that many people know and some people love. So what do you remember of either learning about FDR when you were younger or something that stands out to FDR to you now? If you don't really you're like me, like I don't really remember learning too much history in high school because I'm not the history nerd in this house. That's this one right here. So
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. So tell us what you know or remember of learning about FDR or something that stands out to you now.
I mean, I never went to high school, y'all.
Oh, okay. All right.
So all of this is from later on
Sure.
periods, and also I'm a political policy wonk. I'm hired by my congresswoman. Actually.
Oh, interesting.
That's cool.
But in terms of FDR, it kind of depends on really where you want to end up going, or if you want to talk more specifically about Hoover and his actions. I mean, I do have a juicy topic we could cover on that front. I'm actually in the process of making a video about primarily his what people refer to as his Hoover camps that he had in the Mississippi Delta in 1927-28, whenever I can't think. Is it the Yazoo River in Mississippi?
Yeah, the
main one.
Well, there's the Mississippi, of course, and then it's the Yazoo.
I'm not sure.
Yes, but I know what you're talking about.
But whenever that flooded in 26-27, they forced, and I mean forced, a lot of the local residents, i.e. the Black majority, to pretty much work there, and it was not particularly good for them. So that's been a deep dive. But sorry, I ramble sometimes. I apologize.
No, that's exactly
that's what we want.
This
Ramble
podcast
away.
is for us to kind of chase those rabbits right down the rabbit hole.
So you're covering FDR. He basically didn't help those people, and they set up these camps and had to live out their lives like in just like makeshift shack camps.
Well, this was under the Hoover administration.
Okay.
I was saying if we want to go a little bit further earlier and talk that, could hit that. Otherwise, with FDR, like we can talk about the New Deal policies or.
Well, what's the first thing that you remember learning about him? Like, I think my first time seeing FDR was in Annie. Because she wants to meet FDR.
Of course, you would remember it from.
She wants to meet FDR and Annie. Don't you remember? That's what she wants to do.
I'll be honest. I don't remember Annie at all. I saw it once when I was a kid. So
that's how I remember him. But so when you first learned about him, then were you first learning about the New Deal then, or was it first like World War II? or
Oh, no, I remember what I was doing a deep dive on. It would have been talking about whether or not, essentially, was the U.S. involvement in World War II inevitable.
sure,
Oh, okay.
I want to say that's probably where I first started
Sure.
reading up a bit on him.
Sure. Yeah, well, I mean, he was such a, especially for American history, right? The only president to ever have 4 terms, leading America through the Great Depression, not completely through, right? More the tail end of it, right? And then into World War One or not World War One, World War Two,
Yeah.
like in through World War Two and all that stuff. I mean, he's just a massive, massive figure, right,
Yeah.
in American history. And for me, when I think of FDR, right, when I think of World War II, I think of the New Deal. Those are the things that pop into my
Sure.
brain. And honestly, nowadays, we got the chance to go up to Washington, D.C., and I've been up there a couple times to walk through the Washington Mall, right, to see the memorials there. And so it's honestly now one of the things that comes to mind when I hear FDR is walking through his memorial, through his multiple terms on the Washington Mall in D.C.
Yeah.
That's
a newer one. Have you ever been there, Aster?
I might have
It's a-
passed through.
Yeah, it's a newer
ages
one.
Ago.
okay.
Bill Murray. Bill Murray.
Yeah.
He plays FDR
In what?
in Hyde Park or something. Hyde Park.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And it's a really good movie about FDR's like private life
Huh.
and how he had like an affair with his secretary the whole time.
Oh, yeah.
And how he was very much wouldn't let the reporters take any pictures of him in the wheelchair, right? And they were pretty respectful about doing that, and just all of how he's like navigating his relationship with Eleanor, and still having this affair with the secretary, and everything with World War II. It's a very interesting movie.
Aster, one of the next things we like to chat about with our guests is kind of tends to be more about you, the person,
Yes.
right? And all of our guests. So I like to ask folks, what's the first big historical event that you remember happening? Either a personal event, whether it maybe was local, wherever you grew up, or just kind of the first thing that really stood out to you as, hey, here's some national, global, whatever event that happened that really struck a chord, and all of a sudden the curtain was pulled back and you're like, oh my gosh, like it's not just me in this my tiny little world bubble, right? There's a whole world out there. What's the first historical event that you kind of remember in your life?
It depends on how you want me to answer that, because one, more of a, like in terms of completely shifting how I end up kind of changing in terms of my interests, and now kind of, I guess, my career / goals at the moment.
Sure.
I can think of one very particular for that.
Yeah.
In that case, the thing that got me like involved in politics, and don't worry, I'm not going to delve like into
It's all
partisan
good.
politics.
It's all good.
But,
I trust you.
But I promise I'll be good.
All right.
But the thing that, because I knew nothing about politics prior to the tail end of 2017. And a lot of that came with, I really didn't delve a lot into the history behind a lot of it.
Sure.
But in December of 2017, Doug Jones won statewide in Alabama. And the only reason I even was remotely tapped into it was because of a section on the alternate history forums when I used to frequent that.
Okay.
Where people were talking about it, and then I kind of got a bit more interested. And yeah, it was Doug Jones's victory in Alabama, and then that November was when Danica Rome, the first openly trans individual, got elected, period, in the Virginia legislature. And this was before I came out as trans, before I knew I was trans.
Right.
What it struck a chord in my brain.
Sure, yeah. Absolutely.
But that started getting me very interested in politics and kind of the history behind it. So I started learning a lot more about past elections, and forced me to learn a lot more about the history and that sort of thing. And then more recently started learning about foreign elections, which has resulted in me learning about their history.
Huh.
And it's really kind of shaped me in that sense, I
Interesting.
guess.
That's cool.
So what about that Doug Jones election, like what stood out in that? Was it really just kind of the conversation that came up in the forums and the people that you were kind of chatting with online, or like what about that kind of struck that light bulb for you?
It was people going, my God, this is unprecedented. Like, what is happening?
Yeah.
And that kind of made me like, I want to learn a little bit more about this. So
Yeah.
I started learning it a little bit more. And, it was kind of like, it was essentially kind of a peace in time, just not in the same vein that other historical events are. Like I vaguely remember like Obama getting elected, but
Sure.
I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know who Obama was.
Yeah.
And I was, God, how old would I have been? Yeah, I would have been 11.
So it was more like reacting to other people's strong reactions. It was like, why are people saying this is so unprecedented? I want to know more about why they feel that way.
Yeah, essentially.
Yeah.
It kind of turned into that. And yeah, it was just people being really excited. There was a lot of energy around it, a lot of like almost a slap in the face.
Sure.
Without it being a slap in the face of like, oh, wait a minute. And got me really intrigued.
Now, were you in that area at the time, or were you? I assume you're in the. Are you still in the Wyoming, Colorado area?
Oh God! Oh no! I live in Washington. I live in Washington
DC?
State.
Oh, Washington State.
Washington State.
State.
Okay.
State.
Okay.
You're like,
So-
no,
yeah.
state.
No, God no.
So that's so interesting to me that an election, because you said, so was Doug Jones, was that county, was that local to you,
No,
or
Alabama.
it was at Alabama?
No, it was a special election in Alabama in December 2017.
Yeah, so that's interesting to me that that's something that's like across the country, right? You see it, you hear about it, you hear other people's reactions, and say, hey, like something about something about that kind of rung a bell, lit a light bulb, and you're just like, I want to know more, and that little bit opened the door for you, and you kind of, like you said, it kind of shaped where you're at right now.
It sparked so much of your life.
It sparked something interesting.
Yeah. Pretty much, and same with and I attribute like Danica Rome's victory just the month prior to that to be like, it was kind of the first step, because I didn't know of trans folk really before that period of time.
Okay.
And post that I was like, oh, like it's something that's a bit hard to explain, but it was just kind of like there was a weird, I was drawn to her in a weird way.
Yeah.
And I learned about her victory just from, I think actually the same sources. People were like, oh my God, this is again something the first time that's ever happened.
Yeah.
Sure.
And it was and it's pretty much just kind of shaped things on that front, and it's going to shape my future with plans I have in the work.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
That's super cool. I'll be honest, like for me, I'm trying to think of so I grew up in California, and I'm trying to think of the first time that I really remember like learning who a local politician was, right? Because I'll be perfectly honest, I had no idea there was even like other states when I was younger, right? I was very oblivious, very sheltered.
Same.
But I grew up in Central California, in the Central Coast of California. And probably the first quote unquote politician that I would say I remember is I grew up in an area where Clint Eastwood was the mayor of my city, right? Or actually like the neighboring city, right? Because my parents didn't live where all the people who had money did. I kind of lived off in the boonies a little bit. But that's, I just remember because he was Clint Eastwood, and I was like, oh yeah, I kind of sort of knew who that was. I knew that he was an actor, and I knew that was like different and kind of a big deal because my parents would talk about it all the time. But as far as like a local kind of politician, like the first time that I remember something like that, that's, and I would have been right around 10, 11, right? So somewhere right around then.
I was about the same age. I think Dick Cheney came to speak at my high school.
Because
he was
that's
the
right. He's
senator
from
from
Wyoming.
Wyoming.
I'm so sorry for you.
I know. I know. He's the senator of Wyoming, right? When I was a kid.
Yeah.
That's why it was so
right.
crazy when he was VP.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah.
really? That guy from Wyoming is the vice president?
Yeah.
And I remember he came to our school and everyone's like, ooh, they're our representative. But honestly, there's limited. I mean, you probably know, Esther. There's limited places to speak in Wyoming anyway.
Yeah.
So-
There's only a few cities in Wyoming that are really worth
So it
visiting.
wasn't like that big of a deal when I think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like, just you either have Jackson, you have Cheney,
Yep.
you might. I guess you have Gilbert and Casper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do those even count?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Or you just drive across the
That's
border
your
to
limited
Colorado.
places to speak.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I'll be honest, I really didn't start learning more about that until I got in college. I was a political science major in college, even though I don't really have anything to do with that now. That kind of stuff, it did interest me.
Yeah.
But that's super interesting. That's the first time I think we've ever had a guest who said that a kind of a local election, not even really in your area, but that's something that kind of sparked that. I think that's really cool. Thank you for sharing that with us.
That's really neat.
Yeah.
You're very welcome.
So that kind of leads us into the next question that I like to ask folks. And so what's a bit of regional history that you might know, either living in the area that you do now or wherever you kind of grew up, that most folks, if I was to come visit your neck of the woods, I wouldn't really know that kind of regional history. But around your area, it's relatively common. So what's a bit of regional history that you might know about your neck of the woods that a lot of folks might know or might not know or might not realize?
In terms of that, I guess California used to have a huge neo-Nazi problem, especially within the punk community. I'm also a punk gal. What a shock! So I know the history of that.
Okay.
And in the mid to late 80s, pretty much the eastern end of Oregon and Washington, all those white nationalists moved up here.
Sure.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it's like an Idaho, like all of that area, right?
Yeah, kind of all that area, which is why, in Idaho, you have, they birthed the Three Percenters movement.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And that sort of thing. And here in Spokane Valley, up until I want to say 2020, there was a representative a state representative that was saying we need to train the children in Christian holy war.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
He's a lunatic. But kind of that's a piece that a lot of people don't really know about, and kind of the very white nationalist militias that have formed.
Huh.
It's not a great piece to talk about, but hey,
no, I mean there's a lot of
accurate.
That. Yeah, it's accurate, but to your point, right? And to be honest, there's a lot of history that's not great to talk about, right? I mean, Jen, right? And it's important to know. It's maybe not important to. It's not always great to dwell on certain aspects of it, but it's good to learn. Right, it's good to learn the facts. Like Jen did a lot of work when we were living in Memphis, right? Being in the Navy, I've moved around a little bit. And she did some work with a group that's called the Lynching Sites Project. And they would research old lynchings in the greater Memphis area and try to kind of help with things like healing between. They would look for ancestors on each side and try to bring people together. And there was a lot of really cool stuff. It's a tough topic, right? And it's, again, that's different than white nationalists moving up there. But that's something that's important to learn.
Can't just deny it,
right,
and you can't just pretend it doesn't exist, right? So it is something important, and then it makes you wonder, well, as all good historians do, why this area, why so many, what's the what's the draw, what's the protection, what's the thing here that keeps them that makes people feel like this is an okay place to be together and do this,
Yeah, well, and also I think that's a really good example, Aster, of some regional history, because there's some folks, right? We've had multiple guests on the podcast, and I'm way behind on getting things published and all that stuff. But some folks, they start off young. Like we just talked to Mr. Beat the other day from the Mr. Beat History Channel, and he started off, his kind of love of history started off because he liked geography and he liked maps, and so throughout history, a big part of history is the population shift and migration, right? We have a short series, some of our more popular ones, not as many views as some of your videos, but some of one of our more popular series is about Emmett Till. And one of the things that I learned when I was making that video that I didn't know until I made the video was how some of the population from the South, right, the African American population, moved to places like Chicago, right, in what they called the Great Migration, right? And that's the population shift, and that's an important part of history because that explains things later on down the line. So I think that's actually a really great example of some regional history.
Yeah.
Yeah, and something like that explains the so-called the Red Scare they referred to at the end of World War One. Which
Yeah.
I'm also I'm also working on the video talking about that, and then that's all connected to that, or like the Tulsa massacre in 21. That a lot of people are like, oh, this actually happened, but yeah, it's weird how it's weird, but it isn't how everything's connected in a sense.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that we actually just talked about the Red Scare. That was my word association game with real history. REEL.
Yeah, he does movies.
Yeah. He talks about movies, so he'll talk about probably stuff that you're not interested in, right? Gettysburg,
I couldn't care less. Get that out of here.
Right. So he's on the other end of the spectrum, right? He covers all the popular kind of big movie topics, but my word association game kind of led him into the Red Scare, and we talked about the 1950s and kind of before that, and how that affected Hollywood and the actors and actresses that were blacklisted and all that stuff. As far as your YouTube channel goes, what's kind of something that stood out to you about doing the YouTube channel that kind of surprised you as you've grown?
Surprised which videos took off, honestly.
Yeah.
Like which ones? Can you give us an example?
Specifically, for example, and I'm going to actually look.
Okay.
I did one talking about the 1940 Franco-Thai War, and like that just blew up, which surprised me quite a bit. I was like, oh, like a lot of the stuff is like, a lot of people, some folks might know about like this particular war or not, but it's generally smaller stuff that
Sure.
I wouldn't have expected. Or recently I had one talking about the Great Raid of 1840, essentially the largest Comanche raid into white settled land that happened between the Comanche tribes and the Republic of Texas.
Okay.
That took off recently. Or one talking about like minor colonial nations, one of my very early ones.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Did well too, and I was just like, that's very surprising, but
yeah, and that's the interesting thing about YouTube is like a video will just be kind of hanging out there, and then all of a sudden you're like, why is this one getting a bunch of views? Like, I don't understand. It's not even like, I don't even feel like it was my best video, and all of a sudden it just starts spiking. That's cool.
Or generally the ones where you're like, oh, this will probably get a lot of views, and it gets none.
Yeah. Those ones hurt.
I know. Yeah, the one that particularly hurt, I did one talking about the evolution of women's right to vote in the United States.
Okay.
And it was like, I don't do long videos because I don't have time. I work, at that time I worked a full-time job, ran my own business on top of being a caregiver.
Oh, wow.
And it was like 28, 30 minutes long, and nobody watched it. I'm like, God damn it.
Yeah. No,
I put a lot of time and effort into that.
I know the feeling, Aster. I totally get it.
Yeah.
It sucks.
Yeah, it does.
I know, and you're like, this is a lot of good information. People need to know this.
I put a lot of time and effort into this video. Yeah, that's too funny. So one last question I'll ask you. So what's kind of your videos, right? Since we've been kind of chatting about those, like what's one standout video? If you kind of had to pick one, either something that you started learning about and that it really just, as you learned more about it, you're like, oh my gosh, and it just kind of really stuck in your brain, or something that either had a reaction that kind of resulted in something that was real life, right? Someone emailed you and said, hey, my grandfather fought in that war or something like that. Like, what's one standout video that kind of rings that kind of bell for you?
I have a video talking about the Anglo-Soviet invasion of Iran during World War II.
Yeah.
And from that, I've had in a lot of the World War II specific topics, I've had people be like, oh yeah, my grandfather has, my grandfather, someone in my family was connected or was involved in it.
Sure.
The Iran video, though, I remember I got an email from a scholar in Basra, so in Iraq.
Oh, wow.
And he was like, "Hey, just saw this. Do you mind sharing some of your sources?" So I sent him some of the sources that I was using. Then we started talking a little bit more. And another series actually popped in my brain too. I can mention that later, but
Sure.
It's now to kind of gone to the point where we had a back and forth. And he's like, "Oh yeah, I want to learn." Trying to essentially learn about and or presentate a lot of lesser known Middle Eastern history.
Okay.
And now me and him were working on a project talking about LGBT representation in
Oh, wow.
pre-modern
Wow.
in pre-modern Middle East, which
That's huge.
and it was through weird things like that, and and so I'm working on him on that front.
That's cool.
Good for you. That's huge.
I uploaded a series on the Banana Wars, if y'all are familiar with those.
Yeah.
And I got 2 or 3 emails it was generally teachers going, "Hey, can I show this in my class?"
Oh, cool.
And I was like, "Yeah, of course."
That's awesome. That's really, really cool. I think for us, right, some of those connections that you make with people, right, whether it's people saying, "Hey, I want to share this video," or, "Hey, thank you for making this video and mentioning so-and-so, the person you mentioned that nobody else has was my uncle," or something like that. So that's really, really cool. Aster, thank you for joining us tonight. So if people want to find you online, what's the best place for them to either reach out to you or look for you?
They can find me either on youtube.com, and you can search my channel or just look at Tipsy Fish History. I'll be like the first one to pop up. If they want to message directly, I do have a Facebook page. Same, it's Tipsy History, and that one's actually been popping off. It's about 13,000 followers on that.
Oh, right on.
But that covers just little nuggets of history when I have time. But yeah, that's where folks can generally find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for listening to the Talk with History podcast. And please reach out to us at our website, talkwithhistory.com. But more importantly, if you know someone else that might enjoy this podcast, please share this with them, especially if you think that today's topic would interest a friend. Shoot them a text and tell them to look up the Talk with History podcast, because we rely on you, our community, to grow, and we appreciate you all every day. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.